within today's program, which is great. I see the names on the participant list, and I also see a lot of other people that I know. So welcome everybody. Welcome back. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And throughout the year, the Master Gardeners, this is part of their lecture series program. We have different topics, etc. And I'll make sure that I send out any other announcements or upcoming programs to everybody once I send out that follow-up email. But let's go ahead and jump on it today. Today's program is all about bluebirds, so building for bluebirds. Sometimes we think about bluebirds, and when you see them out in the landscape, I was looking at one this morning when I first got to the office. You know, we might not think too much about them, but they're actually incredibly important species that we have in the state, especially here in North Florida, Nassau County. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. And at the end of today's program, I always like to ask these essential questions. So at the end of today's program, I want you to be able to answer these two questions. Why are bluebirds important parts of our ecosystems? We're going to talk about their role and their value, but also how do we build for bluebirds? How do we think about using our yards, our landscapes, the spaces around our communities as a way to help make sure that we have those environments or those resources needed for bluebirds to be successful and happy in the yards or wherever they're living. And to kind of give a hint on why bluebirds are important, this picture does help serve that. So, but why is a bluebird important? Go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat box. Why should we care about bluebirds? I mean, we care about all of our birds, but why bluebirds? Put your thoughts. There's no right or wrong. I'm just curious of what everyone thinks. Why do you think bluebirds are important? Because they eat bugs. Yeah. So that's great. Enjoyment. Yeah, they're wonderful. Wonderful to watch, to view. They're beautiful birds. They really, really are. But yeah, here are some key hints. Here's a hint. Here's another hint. Here's one more hint. Here's another hint. There's a bluebird feeding a baby. Yes. So bugs, insects. That's why one of the major reasons bluebirds are so important is they are pest control. One of the best things that you can do if you have a vegetable garden or any type of garden, anything in your landscape, is if you build for bluebirds, you're going to help bring them in, which can then provide them the resources, and they are going to control and eat a lot of the insects within our landscapes or within our gardens or throughout our community. They are natural pest control. We talk about sometimes what we call integrated pest management. And integrated pest management is how are we managing the bad insects or bad pests that can end up within our gardens or landscapes. And one of the best ways that we can do that is through biological controls. And this is a great biological control because bluebirds can come in and they will gobble up all of those insects that are within your landscapes and can help control those insects. So, but before we jump in too far about why they are important, because I mean, they eat insects. That's a good thing. But let's learn a little bit about the bluebirds. And that can kind of give us a little better context on why they're important for us and why we need to consider and concern about them within the landscape. So we're going to specifically talk about the Eastern Bluebird. So there's different types of bluebirds or species of bluebirds throughout the United States. But here in our area, we have the Eastern Bluebird. Scialis. So if I said that properly, if I can remember the pronunciation, but they're really unique bird species. So the bluebirds are actually monogamous. So usually you're going to have a mating pair for life. Sometimes you might end up with multiple mating pairs for multiple nests, but they're pretty much monogamous birds and they mate for life. They're typically going to breed in the spring and summer. And we actually have a bluebird box right outside the window I'm at in our Yulee extension office. And there is currently a bluebird sitting on eggs right now. And so they breed in the spring and summer, but then they have about 2 to 3 broods a year. So those 2 to 3 broods, 2 to 3 times that they're laying eggs and raising the bluebirds. And each time they hatch somewhere between 2 to 4 eggs. And then it takes about 13 to 16 days to hatch, and then additional 15 to 20 days for them to get to that fledgling age. So when they're going to start leaving the nest and learning how to fly. But like many of our other bird species, they cannot care for themselves. They hatch, but they need that strong support from those parents as part of feeding, protecting them, etc. So they cannot care for themselves at birth, so they are dependent on having those parents there. And they're very social birds. And then imagine, they lived 6 to 10 years, and in captivity they can actually live up to 15 years, but they live 6 to 10 years, and they will probably start to lay eggs or becoming sexually active between that first and second year of life, or once they turn 1 to 2. And just imagining having 2 to 3 broods a year for almost your entire life, that's a lot of offspring. I have 2 boys, so I can't imagine having 2 every single year, 2 more every single year, as probably all parents in this probably imagine having all of a sudden more kids every year. But anyways, so they're very, very social. They're great birds. And it's when we think about that, that's a unique kind of behavior. It's a kind of unique way in which they're laying eggs. So they do that consistent brood laying throughout each year and every year because they want to generate offspring. Now, when we actually look at how frequent they create the offspring, those broods, and then how many actually grow up to adults is actually a small proportion. So the bluebirds actually lay a lot of eggs knowing that there's going to be a small proportion of them that actually reach that maturity. And then there's other concerns that we need to think about with these Eastern bluebirds. But nonetheless, here's the kind of distribution that we see Eastern bluebirds across the United States and Central America. And here in Nassau County in Florida, we actually have a year-round, we have a year-round population. So, not just breeding season like some of the areas in far north United States. There's also some non-breeding areas that you can see them out during those warmer, cooler, drier winters out west, and then also only during migratory season, so when they're moving between non-breeding and breeding areas. But nonetheless, here we can see them year-round as part of that year-round population. But their food, 2/3 of their food, or about 68% of their diet, is insects. So it could be anything. So caterpillars, grasshoppers, katydids, crickets, you name it, spiders. If they can fit it in their mouth, if it's an arachnid, if it's an insect or anything like that, they will gobble it up. They love to eat them. They're very high in protein. They help provide, a significant food source. And that's one reason that we see a population year round, is because we actually have an insect population that's pretty consistent throughout the entire year. Where some areas where we go through those really cold winters, cool winters, the insect population drops. So because of having that consistent food availability throughout the entire year provides that space for them to come and be successful. But nonetheless, even in the winter time, we do have a slight depression of our insect populations. So they are starting to forage for different types of food sources. And that includes like fruits and seeds, etc. So you can see the female bluebird up on the top. She has looks like a cricket in her mouth. And then in the bottom, we have a male bluebird who is eating a holly berry. But one of the unique things about the bluebirds, and you all mentioned this, is because of that consumption of insects, bluebirds actually have such a huge influence on insect communities. So based off of how much they eat, the frequency that they eat, and the type of insects that they're eating, they're actually being a natural pest control, not just for where we're living, but for the entire ecosystem. They are helping provide a balance and influencing what that insect community is actually consistent of within our area, within our entire region. So if all of a sudden we start to see that the bluebird population starts to decline, then we're going to see that imbalance starts to occur within those pest populations, and that can throw everything off. So they influence and help direct that natural pest community or insect community. I don't want to say pest, but insect community, but they are great for helping control pests within our landscape. So I do want to kind of mention, they influence that insect communities and control pests. Not all insects are considered pests. Only actually about 1% of insects fall within a classification of being a pest. So they're indiscriminate on which insects they're eating, but when we think about them within our communities or our landscapes, our gardens, etc., they do help control those pests, those problematic insects that we can have within our garden. So I wanted to make sure that I made that clarification. But just think, this bird has that big of an impact and an influence on our natural habitats, our natural ecosystem, the biodiversity makeup, and that is significant, but when we think about, okay, where do bluebirds live, they're actually what we call cavity dwelling species. They move into these different cavities within trees. It could be telephone poles, but anything, but they don't have the ability to create those cavities. They move into existing cavities, and predominantly those cavities are created by woodpeckers. So if all of a sudden we remove woodpeckers or woodpecker population goes down, that means those opportunities for this cavity dwelling species to move in goes down as well, and that impacts population. Or in certain situations, say we end up removing dead trees, we remove other trees as part of how we're doing development practices, that could end up removing that area for them to be able to reproduce, populate, live, etc. Bluebirds are really unique because they're one of many cavity dwelling species, and they're one of many that do not make those cavities themselves. So they're not the only one that whose habitat is influenced a lot by like woodpeckers or rotting out of dead trees, etc. But where we see them predominantly living within like these dead trees or these cavities that they find is they're actually living on like margins where we have open land that might have scattered trees, but it's predominantly open and flat. So we can see them in parks, golf courses, gardens, large yards, agricultural areas, but they will make these nests right along the edge or even within these fields, wherever they can find these cavities, so they can hunt. So they can look for these food sources. There's some research that actually shows that bluebirds can see targets within 60 feet. So imagine seeing 60 feet from this bird, being able to look out 60 feet to find its food source. So one of the impacts that we do see is that if we're reducing these areas in which they can find these cavities in order to nest and reproduce, we see a decline in where, if we reduce them, the populations reduce. And when we look, statewide, even nationally, we really look at how development can actually lead to an increase in their breeding and habitats, because a lot of times we're coming in and we're clearing out certain areas. Agriculture helps provide different habitat for them, or prime habitat, but we're still seeing a decrease in that population. So usually this is happening like within the suburbanization, that growing of cities, high density urbanization, we don't see the bluebirds exist. But overall, we're seeing that habitat increase, but still the population is beginning to decrease. And there's a couple different concerns or influences that impact that population. So, you know, just because we're having an increase of habitat, is it high quality habitat for those bluebirds to be successful? And when we talk about urbanization, I show this map in some of my programs. So we think about density. Where are we seeing habitat that is able? Where are we having habitat or even losing habitat that allows them to be successful within our gardens or landscapes or environments? So this map comes from the Florida 2060 plan. So it looks at land use change from 2005 up to 2060, and it's looking at population growth, development patterns. And what you see in this map from the 2005 map is in red. That's what we call our developed land. So that's the landscape where we're seeing commercial, industry, residential, etc. The pale tannish color, that is predominantly, you know, agriculture, forested areas, etc. And then that dark green, that's land that's held in conservation. So when we look at how Florida develops, how it expands, how it changes, and we know that the population is supposed to double in from 2005 to 2060, we have the ability to interpolate how that development is going to shift and change throughout the state. And this is what that is supposed to look like, anticipated supposed to look like by 2060, and it's pretty on par currently with those projections. And I know that there is the 2070 plan out now, and it's not too different from this map as well. So we're seeing that with this increased development, there is going to be habitat loss to a certain extent, and that still has an impact on the bluebirds, because is it a high quality environment and ecosystem in which they can live? So we're seeing habitat loss through this high density urbanization. And then we're also seeing a food source decline. These are some major concerns that we're seeing with bluebirds. And when we see food source decline, pesticide usage, so increased pesticide usage within the within urbanized areas, that's essentially eliminating their food source. And if we're using excess of pesticides, we're eliminating their food, and then they're going to be purely reliant off of some of those other food sources that might be around. And that we know is having a huge, huge impact on the overpopulation, is because of pesticide use or misuse of pesticide is having an impact on bluebird health and bluebird populations, as well as lacking plant diversity. When we in natural areas, there's a lot of diversity in food sources, but as we change land uses to something more urbanized, we bring in a bunch of different ornamental plants. Some are going to have food source availability for some of the bluebirds, but a lot of them are not. So really making sure that we're improving diversity of plant material within our landscapes can help provide substantial food source and food source availability for a lot of these different bird species. And that's not limited to the Eastern Bluebird in that statement. So plant diversity really significantly improves food source availability. But if we remove that diversity in that food available, the population is going to end up leaving those areas, because even though it might be more open, but how we're managing them has an impact on that overall population. So what can we do? What can we do? So that's where we talk about the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and we're not going to jump too far into that program today, but I want to bring it up because it's important, because thinking about wildlife is an important part of our statewide sustainable landscape and sustainable management program. So what is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program? It's just an integrative approach or a sustainable way is like, how do we manage our landscapes properly to make sure that they're friendly to wildlife, they're environmentally responsible, and they can be less work than a traditional landscape. The ultimate goal of the Florida-friendly landscaping program is to conserve water, protect water quality, and enhance biodiversity. So biodiversity is how do we create these habitats that provide diversity or increase diversity from different species, including our wildlife. So within that, there are these 9 principles that we use to help guide how we're managing, how we're planning, how we're using our landscapes. And the 5th and 6th principle is attract wildlife, and 5 is attract wildlife, and 6 is manage yard pests. So attracting wildlife is how are we providing these habitats that are going to be great for different birds, including the bluebirds. There's kind of like a simple mantra that we say in extension, that if you plan for birds, you're planning for all of wildlife, which is a really cool thing. Is if we create a landscape that helps enhance that birding population or that bird population and diversity and number, then we're going to actually have an overall more sustainable landscape. So we can attract these different wildlife. And what's really, really great is when we're talking about the 9 principles in managing yard pests, is if we're attracting wildlife, those beneficials help control those pests naturally. So there's actually some really cool research that we can talk about at a later time. Maybe I'll send out the document about it, where, there's been some research with one of University of Florida specialists where they took unused parts of a golf course and they turned it into a wildflower meadow, and all of a sudden pollinators were coming in and more of these predatory bird species were coming in. And what happened is it decreased pesticide usage significantly, not just where they had the wildflower meadows, but around all those wildflower meadows, is because they had those natural predators coming in and managing those pests within that whole area of the golf course. So it was really, really cool study. So we provide these landscapes that attract wildlife, that allows them to help manage those pests for us. So then we're not having to pay someone, or we're not applying these different insecticides or pesticides to our landscapes, when we let Mother Nature do that on its own, and it's very effective. So when we think about this habitat, or prime habitat for bluebirds, it allows us to start to think, what if we want to design or build or plan our landscapes for bluebirds? Here's some of those prime habitat influencers. So they like having open grassy fields if possible. It can be either mown or just an area of low growth where there's no trees in it. So having widely scattered trees, so it's not in a density, that gives them an ability to find a place to perch and look out and hunt. They love berry producing shrubs and vines because it does help provide supplemental food. They love tree snags. So tree snags, I think that's one of the most valuable things that we can put in our landscape or have within our landscape. A tree snag is essentially just a dead tree. It has the ability to house thousands of species all at one time of different insects, bugs, and they're all going to be beneficial, birds, etc. So they love those tree snags because they can nest in them. They can perch from the trees. So they also look for the shrubs. They like utility wires because, again, they like to be able to look out over an open area and be able to hunt. Telephone poles or fence posts. So if those are around these natural areas, you're going to see bluebirds using them. Now, I wouldn't say, oh, you want to attract bluebirds, go put up utility wires and telephone poles. No, but we can definitely see that is habitat that we can see within our area where you can have a high chance of seeing them, those open areas where you can see high points for them to roost up on or get up on and look out. Avoid pesticides. Integrated pest management is cultural management first. So how are we managing it? Followed by mechanical controls. So that's, not pesticide, but if we follow cultural controls, and then the mechanical is if there's any bad things in your yard, you can remove them yourself. And then there's biological controls, which includes, using wildlife to manage those insects for you. And then pesticides always come last. They're the last ditch effort if nothing else works. But if we avoid the use of pesticides, we have those bluebirds come in and establish, and that helps them control those pests naturally. So it's a wonderful tool to have them, or they're great to have because of how they manage those insects. And also think about a nearby water source. Of course, everyone needs water. So when we think about those habitats, then we think about, okay, how can I potentially provide different food sources for some of the bluebirds? So, we're not going to go out and get a bunch of insects and bring them into our yards. To a certain extent, you can bring different bird feeders, but I would actually, they're very specific on bluebirds, and we'll talk about unintentionally attracting some bad birds in a minute. But if we want to plant for bluebirds, who are great foragers, we could think of some of those shrubs that we can bring into our landscapes within our natural areas, public spaces, etc. And these are just a couple of them. The list is a mile long of what we can provide for food. But if we wanted to think about some plants, these are ones that are super common and you can go get today if you wanted to. But any hollies, any fruit bearing holly, so like our Yopon holly, that's our native. I love that one. And if you wanted to, you can make tea out of the leaves. It's really great. We have the American holly. So any of our hollies that are producing fruit, that is going to be a great food source for bluebirds. And then, it also adds a really great ornamental quality. Any type of juniper berries are great food sources. We have a lot of our ornamental junipers that might stay nice and low, Parsons juniper, short juniper, etc. I have a Parsons juniper in my front yard and it's fruiting right now. But like a red cedar, that's a great tree because it does provide height and it does provide a lot of food availability. But of course, if you have a lot of allergies, I wouldn't recommend a red cedar right next to your home. But one of my favorites that I love to use is the beautyberry, that Calicarpa americana. The beautyberry is one of the great things about it is, it's shrubby. It looks kind of nice in the middle of the growing season. But then what happens is it flowers in the fall and fruits, and then the leaves drop, but then the branches are just covered all the way up. The branches are covered in clumps of purple berries. All birds love that. They will come flocking to those beautyberries and they will munch on them. So the beautyberry helps provide a shrub and during that growing season, but then also it creates this really colorful display throughout the cool season that adds a very high wildlife value to it because they can gobble up all those fruits. And then also, if you have space, we love them. I love to eat them. They're yummy. Mulberry. Our white mulberry, red mulberry, black mulberry, any of those mulberry bushes or trees are great food sources for bluebirds. At an old home we had this 40-foot mulberry in our yard. And when it was producing fruit, it was like the epicenter of bird activity within the neighborhood. They were all flocking to it and gobbling up and eating all the fruits. And there was more than enough where if I stood out there with a bucket, I would fill up that bucket of mulberries for me to eat. But anyways, so these are different types of food sources that we can provide to bluebirds that help provide, ornamental quality, but also that quality to help provide food to the bluebirds. And a neat thing is, as part of that ornamental quality, like these hollies, the junipers, the beautyberries, they can help provide essentially fruit year round to the bluebirds. So next, let's talk about the providing shelter. So shelter, I talked about birds love tree snags. And here's an example of a tree snag on the right side of the slide. You can see that cavity, boop, that's sitting right there. That's a great location for a bluebird to be in. Now, was a bluebird using it when this photo was taken? No, but that is a cavity that could be used by a bluebird or another cavity dwelling bird. But those tree snags, they create cavities from those old woodpecker holes, like I mentioned, or just like rotten out portions of trees that from old broken branches, etc. Then any kind of cavity that they can find within a tree, that is where they can form and build their nest and build their homes. A dead tree is unbelievably valuable. When people call me and say, Taylor, we have an issue. One of our trees in our yard, I think it's about to fall over or it's dead. And not fall over. I'm concerned it's dead. What should I do? And I said, if it falls today, will it fall on a car, a person, a home, or anything that could be of damage? And they say no. And I said, cool, keep it. And then I explain the value of it. And then it's like, oh, wow. So the next thing, they just keep it there, and they have a tree that provides an amazing home for all these different birds, including the bluebirds. And if you went walking around through trails, conservation areas, or anything like that, these natural areas, and you find, sometimes you'll just see a dead tree in the middle of a forest stand. Just look on that tree and see how many holes are existing within those dead trees, because those are all opportunities for birds to nest, as well as you're going to have all the other beneficial animals, insects, etc., that are all living in there as well. Someone once documented about 10 different ant colonies on one tree snag, which is really, really cool. But also another way that you can really see this, that I really like to see, is if you ever go paddling, you're paddling down a river or a stream, you know, canoeing, and you look at all those trees that are lining the river or the stream or wherever you're at, you will see cavity holes in all of the trees that are, or a lot of the trees that are lining the riparian area, because the birds like to get in there. It's an open area, they can easily hunt. So it's a really cool way to go see them. But a dead tree can be very valuable. A tree snag is one of the best things that we can provide to wildlife if we have the ability to do so. But if you don't have the ability to provide a tree snag, we can still have a birdhouse. So I want us to play a game. So I need everybody to get your chat box open. And this is just a game of yes or no. And it's called, should they call it home? And in this game, all I want interested is, I'm going to show you pictures of cool birdhouses. And I want you to tell me, should a bluebird call it home? Okay. Are you all ready? Put that in the chat box. That's my check. So the first birdhouse is this one. Should a bluebird call this home? You put yes or no in the chat box. Man, y'all just flooded that in so quickly. Good job. The answer is no. Ah, man. Okay. So what about this one? Should a bluebird call this home? I'm seeing a lot of yeses. And the answer is no, it should not call it a home. It's like, okay, Taylor. All right. What about this one? Should this one be considered a, it looks cool. Is this one a great bluebird home? I got all no's. Correct. It's a no. All right. I think we have one more. All right. Should this be considered a bluebird home? And the answer is no. So all of these, none of these birdhouses are actually good for bluebird houses. And you may ask why. I see that. So, but why are they not good bluebird homes? And that ultimately comes down to these two guys right here. And we're going to talk about what makes a good quality bluebird home. But the reason that these are not good bluebird homes is because of these bird houses, the English house sparrow and the European starling. I was looking at an old presentation that existed for the bluebirds, and there's a lot of images I omitted because I didn't want them to be in here. But anyways, these two birds are why they are not appropriate. They are both considered invasive species. So they were introduced to the United States, both around the same time, and I'll have a little detail on each, but they, an invasive species, not just plants, but wildlife as well, they have the ability to displace natural populations, to in some cases kill the natural populations, outcompete those native bird species like our bluebirds. And these two are very, very problematic, and they are very invasive, or they are invasive species. So we'll talk about each one. You've probably seen the European starling do this thing we call murmuration, where in these big like groups, and they like how they move is actually really, really cool. Those murmurations, you can like pull up videos on YouTube and just watch it for hours. But this European starling, it was introduced in the United States in the late 1890s. It is believed because of they wanted like Central Park area to kind of be representative of Shakespeare or something. And they're like, oh yeah, let's bring those birds from Europe and let's release them. So they released, the rumor is they released about 100 of them in Central Park, but quickly their population exploded. And now we have about an estimated 150 to 200 million European starlings within the country. They are highly, 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 highly destructive. So when we talk about the Eastern Bluebird, it's like the insects and some of those random fruits that they find, but insects, pest control. Well, the starling, they're more interested in grain and seeds. So they're actually very destructive to agriculture. When I was at University of Kentucky, a lot of European starlings would flock to those ag fields around the university on the outside of Lexington. And during the winter, they would all come into the city. So there'd be just thousands of European starlings like everywhere. And there would be people that would literally just stand outside all day with bottle rockets. Whoop, and they launch them up in the air towards these murmurations to scare, to try to disperse them, because they come in, they wreak a lot of havoc. They're trying to get them active and moving to make it a less desirable place to be. And then they poop on everything. There's so much poo once they kind of land and congregate into certain areas, and it smells really bad. But they gather in these really, really large numbers. They destroy a lot of crops. They destroy a lot of these habitats. But one of the major things is they too are cavity dwelling species, and they will actually kill bluebirds and other cavity dwelling birds. They will fly into those birdhouses and they will kill the bluebirds, the eggs, the babies, remove them, or take over the nest completely to take over that cavity dwelling space. So it's not just bluebirds, but other cavity dwelling species. This European starling will come in and it will kill a lot of our native species. So the English house sparrow, we've seen these are pretty common, but same thing is this specific sparrow. There are good sparrows and there are good starlings. It's these two specific species. But the English house sparrow, it was released in New York City and in like 1851, and then it was already established in California in 1910. So we're talking about invasive species. It took 60 years for them to be across the United States. That is significant for an invasive species. Despite their size, they're wildly aggressive. They're wildly aggressive. They will kill the bluebird adults, the chicks, the eggs. Same thing as mentioned before. They fly into those birdhouses or those different cavities, and they will kill whatever's in there and take it over. So it's important that when we're thinking about birdhouses, we are making sure that we are creating a space that deters the starling and the sparrow. And very similar to the starling, they go for seeds, so they're destroying agriculture, and they will kill those other birds. So these are invasive species that are killing a lot of these native cavity dwelling species like our Eastern Bluebird. So how do we, what is a appropriate bird house for our bluebirds? There's a lot of different recommendations as how to make it most attractive and try to prevent these invasive species from coming in. But the two biggest recommendations is your entry hole has to be 1.5 inches or less in diameter. And that prohibits the starling from being able to get in. The hole is just too small for them, so they can't get in. So all of a sudden, great, that birdhouse is safe from the starling. And then also no perch. So imagine a bluebird is a cavity dwelling species, so it doesn't need a perch sticking out of the front of it for it to land. But you know it does need it? That sparrow. So that European sparrow needs it. So if we remove the perch, all of a sudden the sparrow can't use it. So I'm going to go back real quick and we'll look at these birdhouses again. They all have perching spaces. So I didn't use any about hole diameter because I don't know how big the holes are in those images, but nonetheless, they all have perches or a place for a bird to perch. So therefore, those shelter are not appropriate for a bluebird. So less than 1.5 inch diameter and less, and then we don't want a perch. So here are some basic structures for a bluebird house. So what we have is essentially just, you have your wooden box, you have a hole that's 1.5 inches or less, and there is no perch. But you can actually see on the image on the left, there is a little green looking wire frame cage around it that's not required. But the idea is one of our natural predators for bluebirds are snakes. Snakes will wriggle their way up, raccoons will climb their way up, etc., and they'll get inside and eat the eggs or the birds, depending. So that thought is it helps prevent some of those other predators from getting in and eating those eggs, some of those natural predators. But at least with invasive species, no perch, 1.5 inch and less or less. And let me see, I will send actually everybody some plans on how you can build these yourself, or you can actually go and you can buy kits. They're really cheap. They're easy to do. And one of the nice things is you can easily mount them. I think you can put them on top of a fence post, but we're trying to keep some of the predators out. Usually like a metal pole like you see on the image on the left is more preferred to mount it to because it could be harder to climb than maybe a fence post. But I have to turn off my background image real quick so you can see this birdhouse. So, and I will stop my share. Okay, so you can see it a little bit better. So this is a simple bluebird house that the master gardeners have built. Very basic, again, no perch. This isn't a perch, this just keeps the door closed. We'll screw it in, but it's very, very basic. So it's a simple birdhouse to build, nothing fancy. It's important, I'll get some more details on what they need. But one thing that is important is it's important to clean out the inside of the birdhouse. So usually one panel is going to have to be removable, usually put on a hinge. This one is literally just 2 screws are just screwed in at the top holding it. So it kind of creates a hinge. But also on the back side of this door, you'll see these like little grooves, these lines that are within the birdhouse. This actually on the inside allows the little fledglings to be able to climb up and get to the hole a little bit better from the inside. So these things are very basic, but you know, we can go and spend crazy amount of money on these really fancy birdhouses, but they're attracting some of these invasive species that can kill some of our native important cavity dwelling birds, where you can literally, I think, go to the store and get kits for like 20 bucks, not even, and you can build your own. And it's going to be more effective with regards to our native bird species. So let me open back up the PowerPoint again. So the providing shelter is important, but making sure that we're providing appropriate shelter is more important than that. So usually we want to make sure they're made of wood, non-treated. The hole is 1.5 inch diameter or less. I think you don't want to make any less than 1.25 inches. But allow one side to be on a hinge. You can paint and decorate the outside if you like, but do not provide a perch. So coming back to our essential questions, Why are bluebirds important parts of our ecosystem? So they help control that pest population. They help influence the population within our natural areas. So we build these different, we provide different food sources maybe within our landscapes. We can provide these appropriate homes to help build for them, to help create these safer habitats for bluebirds to exist. So those are two essential questions that we just loop back around to. So we should have been able to address all these during this time. And one of the questions that just came in is how often and when do we clean these out? Usually you can clean these out after you keep it clean. But once a bluebird establishes within it, you have the ability to remove it after a brood or fledgling when they're no longer active in there. Just make sure it stays clean or empty out anything to make it open for something else to come in. Now, say you do have a birdhouse that is any of our other dwelling species in, yeah, let them use it. No problem. But say you notice some of the invasive bird species that are using these, say you see a sparrow fly in, and they're making a nest, just go out there and remove the nest. They'll come back, they'll try to build a nest again. You open it up, you remove the nest. Never let them finish building that nest. And after a week or so, they'll leave because they'll realize I can't get in there. It's not worth it to them. So it's actually an active way to discourage attracting the or allowing the invasive species to establish within a birdhouse, as well as when we're thinking about supplemental foods like bird feeders. You know, hummingbirds provide nectar. You can't provide very specific food sources for birds. Now, general bird seed mixes are great, but we have to be very selective on what we put in because you could unintentionally be attracting some of those invasive birds to your landscape, and then that can end up creating different battles and fights, etc. But anyways, so those are essential questions, and that was a great question someone just asked. You know, always feel free to reach out to us. Our main office is out in Callahan, but here's my contact information. Here's my contact information. You can send me emails. You can send me questions. If you see me out on the street, feel free to come up and ask me questions. I don't mind. And also, man, I feel like I got a cough. My allergies are driving me nuts today because all the oak trees and the pines are starting to flower. But anyways, feel free to reach out to me how to find these resources. And what I will do is I'm going, as always, I'm going to follow up with plans on how to build for bluebirds. And also there's some really cool Audubon apps that you can get on your phone that you can go and see where people are citing these different bird species, or you can mark yourself where you can find these bird species, or you can look up where those birds are actively sighted, and you can see how they're moving around the country. It's really, really cool app. It's free, the Audubon app. I love it. It's through like Audubon and Cornell University have great birding apps and resources to learn more. So and in addition, we have all of our upcoming programs as well. I'll follow up with our next online programs that we do have. Our next Landscape Matters program is plant propagation, but we're going to be doing that one just in person, but I'll still send everybody that information about all of our upcoming programs through April. So feel free to answer any questions that you may have, and I can help answer those as much as I can. So here's one question. Is it good to make mealworms available for bluebirds? Yeah, it's not the most preferred, but yes, making mealworms available for some of those bluebirds can work as a food supplement, because a lot of the like the sparrow and the starling aren't going to be as interested in those. So you're providing a food source that might not intrigue them. Great question. Will bluebirds live near the marsh? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You know, as long as there's a freshwater source available to them, and birds are very, very creative on where they can find those where they can find the water source. So yeah, you could definitely find them near the marsh, but a lot around the marsh, or like a lot of those brackish or open water areas that are salt, you're going to get a lot of those fishing type birds like a kingfisher, etc. But yeah, you can definitely have bluebirds county-wide. We'll find them. Is it harmful to bluebirds to lift the panel and look at the eggs and babies? No, you can actually, if need be, you can actually kind of, if you need to protect them, you can relocate if possible. I wouldn't recommend it, but no, it's not. You're not going to want to do it constantly, but it could be a way to check on them to make sure they're all right. Our bluebird nest out here, I peeked in and I saw the mama sitting on the eggs, and she was just like, "Whoa, what you doing?" And I just closed it to make sure she was all right. You know, if you have the tech and know-how, I know some people that actually have cameras inside their Bluebird boxes so they can watch live feeds all the time, which is wonderful. So yeah, and there is a comment that you can actually kind of tap on the box to kind of let them know, hey, I'm going to come check you out. And the mama may fly out briefly, and you'll see her, she'll perch up somewhere close by as you do an inspection, and you can close it and they'll fly back in. So great question. I'm getting caught up. We have some wonderful questions coming. Someone rescued a bluebird in a wood burning stove this week. Oh, wow. That is not the first time it has happened. Oh, wow. So I'm assuming they're probably thinking like the chimney might be like, they think of it as a cavity nest. So they fly in and then can't figure out how to get back out. That can happen. I've heard of that happening. There are wire meshes that you can put on outlets on your attic or around your home to help prevent things from getting inside of it. How do you initially attract bluebirds? It's really hard. If you actually talk, you can provide all the resources that you want, but if you talk to birders, avid birders, they could say a day, a week, a month, a year. It really depends. It really depends on, you know, you can provide all those resources, but then once they find it, they're going to keep coming back. They're going to keep using that bluebird house that you created for them. It's just a matter of providing all the resources to help attract them. Sometimes you can scatter food on the ground so then they can see it as they fly above, but that can also attract some of those other bad birds as well. So it's just, attracting bluebirds is a game of patience. It really is a game of patience, or any bird. So one person asked is, what do I know about the Cornell University Bluebird Project? So the Bluebird Project, I'm not 100% sure on that specific project, but I think it has to do with just self-reporting or like citizen science projects to manage and just track populations, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll look that up because the Cornell University ornithology website, I mean, it's it's cool. So it is a really cool resource. So, but anyways, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Oh yeah, do squirrels deter nest building of bluebirds? They can, but squirrels may not find that those, unless there's a food source within those nesting boxes, they will fight and they will deter one another, but it's not substantial to the overall population. So that's a really good question. And I will send it in the follow-up email, but I'm putting in the chat box right now. This is our, you know, I always do the follow-up survey. You know, that also gives you an opportunity to any questions that you may have or any topics that you think you would like to see some of our future programs. That's a really cool way to kind of give that or put those thoughts in. Again, I will follow that up. Follow up with that information in the future as well in an email. But that link, that follow-up link is within the chat box. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us today.